Surrender Not the Flame. Episode 1. Into the World. Driving snow pounded the steep slope. Feet bound in animal skins plunged into the pack, sinking to the knees. Elouan's eyebrows were caked with frost as he scoped out the distance he had yet to traverse. Though in the darkness of the storm, he really didn't know where or how far he had come, much less the further he had to go. His torchlight twisted and danced within the gusts, nearly drawn to extinction by the cyclonic currents. Nevertheless, the light held true, matching his own determination to survive. The cold of the wind and blasting snowfall stung, but fortunately, it was only the split in the mask at the eyes where he was exposed. The rest of his face, and thankfully the rest of his body, remained warmly wrapped by various animal furs. He trudged down the towering hillside of the French Alps, keeping a watchful eye on the erratic flickering of the torch while also protecting the knapsack hung over his chest. He didn't carry much, but what he did bring he considered crucial to the success and survival of his mission. A sudden gust resisted his descent, forcing him to stop. The impact nearly knocked the wind out of him. He steadied himself. He imagined becoming the eye of the storm, the center where all things can churn about, but where he would remain in unshattered peace. It was a focus he knew he would have to master, not just to survive the onslaught, but to accomplish the very quest he had left his mystery school to achieve. Could he overcome the fear sure to tempt him? Having spent most of his life in the high Alps, he had been bathed in the serenity of the Muin Mystery School compound, tucked neatly away within the colossal mountain peaks. The temple's brightly painted stupas, arched halls, and stone-fenced courtyards remained cleverly hidden, shielded from the valleys below by the angle of the summit pinnacles. The community of nearly 500 initiates and 7 master teachers lived peacefully atop and within the mount. The outer temples supported by a labyrinth of caverns and underground living areas carved into the bedrock inside the heart of the slopes. The architectural design was quite deliberate. It was meant to keep everyone living there hidden from the outside world. The wisdom and skills taught at the mystery school stretched back centuries. No one really knew how long, but had long since been forgotten by society. Elouan knew his fear would come when such knowledge would inevitably clash with the modern way of life, when a member of the temple descended to engage the chaos of civilization. Such engagement was expected in order to advance from guardian priest to master teacher, though this was not the reason he advanced into the storm. Nonetheless, the true test of a guardian such as himself required the pilgrimage of service, where one entered the world and helped others in a way that would hopefully elevate consciousness, if only slightly, by inserting pieces of the long-lost wisdom back into humanity. It was a dangerous mission, made even more dreadful by the herald of screams from the faraway east. His mind wandered, carrying him back to his departure from the school and his last goodbye to to his closest friends. Golda and Wymark, around their early 20s, stood aglow within the soft light of torches perched in sconces carved into the rock walls of the small cave. They blocked Elouan from reaching the cavern mouth. Golda reluctantly helped him don his furs.
Surely you remember hearing such anguish in the Orient.
And you've never traveled into lands of such darkness before.
Darkness is not something to be feared, or else the sun would never shine.
Then what of us?
Elouan understood her uneasiness. The clouds outside blackened the stars beyond the grotto, and the incoming winds trumpeted the cries of a sinister wraith. The snow pelted Elouan, bringing him back to the present. He dropped to his knees, planted the torch, then clawed into the snow. He suddenly grabbed the light before the wind could carry it away. The flames dimmed to a lonely ember in the gale. Would it survive the night, he wondered.
Yes, it will endure, as all things must.
The phrase brought a smile to his lips, still kept warm inside the mask. It was the same acknowledgement delivered by his master before he embarked on this dangerous journey. Oh, Master Yurik, what a perfect, gentle soul. The enlightened guru gave his tranquility to everyone who visited, a gift he hoped to instill in all his students, including Elouan. Such peace embraced Elouan when he knelt before him at the temple altar just hours earlier. The master had sat most of the day, lit only by candles. The warm orange glow glistened off his white satin robes, creating a radiance that made him stand out like a heavenly mediator amidst the ornate tapestries adorning the walls. Elouan wondered if it was that sense of divinity he craved when he touched his knees to the polished floor. He had already made the decision to embark upon the quest. He wanted the celestial promise of success, not only for himself, but for his master and the home he was leaving behind. He remembered how lightly the peacock feather blessed each of his shoulders as Yurik tapped him, evoking his spring of compassionate wisdom.
We will endure, as we always have, as so shall you.
Elouan calmly slid another ice block into place. The torch flame burst more brightly than it had all night, now protected behind the height of the packed snow shelter. Fortunately, his revelry with the past shielded his muscles and mind from the task of its construction amidst the onslaught of the storm. With relief and satisfaction, he raised both arms triumphantly and tilted his head back in a joyful blend of man with nature. Then he faced the flame, knelt, and took its warmth upon his face. The heat returned his mind back to his friends in the cave of his departure. Elouan kissed Golda on the cheek, and then Wymark. At last the light of the torches revealed him, a youthful mid-20s, yet eyes that brandished the wisdom of an old soul.
You know I must do this. My mother beseeched me.
Please speak with us.
Warn us of danger when it happens.
Wymark, you and Golda worry too much.
Summoning her courage, Golda wrapped Elouan's face with the fur.
Your passage would be much safer by the calming presence of the morning sun.
Remember, even the tapestry of night cannot suffocate the light of the stars.
Elouan threw the knapsack over his head, allowing it to land gently upon his chest. Then he grabbed a torch from the wall, and for a brief moment he considered its radiant flame, then retreated into an orange glow coming from outside. Weimar Gongola watched as he stepped away, clearly torn by his mission. A warm haze of firelight bathed Elouan as he began his quest to cross the snow-covered hillside. Several caves dotted the high expanse, just below the great walls of the Muin temple complex. 2 or 3 monks flanked each dwelling. A lit torch was passed from one monk to another. Each lit their own torch from the initial flame, creating the glow over Elouan's departure. All manner of nationality peeked out from behind the heavy furs of this humble group. Caucasians, Black, Asian, East Indian, males and females alike. And when the last torch was lit, the group raised the glow high into the air and hummed in unison a tune that echoed across the mountain range. The humming carried into the temple's Holy of Holies chamber, where the school's 7 masters formed a single row and prostrated before a tapestry painted with a brilliant orb representing the sun. They were, in their own sacred way, praying for Elouan's safety as he began his odyssey into the wilderness. The humming of his comrades filled Elouan's ears as he trekked down the mountain, bathed in the splendor of the vigil. The snow and wind picked up, then consumed him in its darkness. Brilliant sunlight danced on dewdrops as the snowpack gave way to shrubbery and the inviting entrance of a forest grove. Elouan sat on a large boulder and undid the twine tying his boots. In no time, he dressed into a silk tunic, trousers, and stockings, then rushed through the woods, a brilliant smile from ear to ear. Elouan trotted around shrubs and knelt at a thick, stocky bush. He adored the plant, seeing the stalks of new growth. He gently snapped one of its soft branches and took a hearty bite from it. Sometime later, he found himself along the banks of a river. He dipped his hands into the rapids, feeling the water cascade like a jubilant kiss upon his skin, then splashed his face with the blessed spring. A beaver suddenly came up beside him. Elouan slowly extended his arm and, amazingly, scratched the mammal's shin. Their eyes met, and it seemed a message passed between them. The creature bounded into the river and swam to its lodge. She was met by 2 kits peeking above the wood.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you.
A squirrel bounded from tree to tree on a highway of branches. Elouan chased after it from the forest below. The critter led him out of the woods onto a barren dirt road, then disappeared into the next grove.
You win!
Elouan stopped at a fork in the road. A post with wooden signs pointed in various directions. Rome, Avignon, Toulouse, Bordeaux. He hesitated, waiting for one of the signs to beckon his attention. None of them did. He dropped to his rear and dug into his belongings, pulling out a worn piece of leather with a faded symbol painted on it.
Not too long now from the spring equinox for this great year of 1347. So how old does that make this?
He clenched it tightly in his fist, then closed his eyes to focus more deeply into the fabric. Like a sword piercing his gut, the memory of young Ranulph, 20s, a man infuriated, assaulted his awareness. Elouan saw him pull his hand away from Roja, a young, plain but beautiful peasant woman. Rosa yanked at young Ranulph's clothing, gnawing at the leather sash with the symbol on it, the very one Elouan was holding.
It will be the end of us.
Where have you gone?
Elouan closed his eyes and fell into a meditative state. A colossal galactic umbrella of pink and purple clouds stretched into the coming night, while Elouan remained in the meditative pose. Behind, a pack of wolves were sneaking up. The lead wolf bared his fangs, ready to strike, silently, cunningly. Elouan, back still turned, eyes closed and silent, raised a hand as if to say, "Stop." The pack, strangely, were frightened by the message and leapt back into the forest. Within hours, rain drowned the countryside, soaking Elouan in the deluge. He hadn't stirred. The downpour flowed over his face and cascaded as tributaries into the bowl of his lotus-seated legs. When morning arrived, a brilliant sunbeam spotlighted Elouan, still held deep in meditation. In fact, the length of facial stubble revealed he'd actually been here for days. A deer and its young fawn sniffed him curiously. Then, finding him quite queer, returned swiftly into the forest.
Ho! Whoa!
What is he doing?
I don't know. Hey, you! Get out of the road!
Is he asleep?
The man poked Elouan, but the young lad failed to stir.
Is he dead?
We'll leave him be.
Elouan at last opened his eyes to spy a falcon soaring away with a dead prize gripped in its talons. Its trajectory followed the shadows of the forest treetops, married in perfect alignment with one of the roads. Elouan knew that was his answer on where to travel. He stood, feeling the growth of beard upon his face. With a smile, he hoisted his pack and hiked down the boulevard. A deer was munching the grass alongside a narrow forest road. Suddenly, the nearby trees and branches rustled in agitated frenzy. Spooked, the fawn darted away.
No! No!
Rachel leapt out of the woods. She angrily wiped tears from her cheeks, then reattached the braid pulled loose from the side of her face with a quick reinsertion of the hairpins. With a tug, she repositioned the wimple back over her hair and chin. Her breath pulsed with fury, while a patch of her chest laid exposed, the first few buttons of her worn linen kirtle undone. Jehan, slightly older than her, remained in the foliage, hidden from the waist down by the bushes.
Rachel! 'Twas nothing! Come back!
I thought such things only came after the ringing of bells.
She mounted a tired old horse bridled to a cart filled with chopped stumps.
No idle hands, Jehan.
She rode away, passing an expensive white stallion tied to a tree. The steed was the epitome of youth and vigor by comparison to her mare. Jehan, resigned, glanced at his hand, then down to his waist hidden behind the bushes.
Well, my friend, here we go again.
The waters of the Mediterranean twinkled in the bright sun as Rachel reached the crest in the hill leading down to the old port city. The mosaic of buildings appeared quite inviting, but was still at least a half hour away, down the slope of a farmland plateau. Nonetheless, it shined like a beacon along the bay, a wealth of stone and wooden buildings stretching a few square miles and capped by a wondrous cathedral. A stone rampart surrounded the town, wrapping all the way to the inlet shores, complete with defensive parapets. A single massive wooden gate provided entrance and exit, presently open for all visitors. Rachel sighed with relief, knowing soon she would be safe within its walls. First, she had to traverse the potholes of the earthen roadway. She had come from the eastern woods, which was a highly traveled road that easily succumbed to erosion from the many visitors on way to the town. As she jostled upon the cart bench, she spotted a lone stranger approaching from an adjoining road that came in from the darker forest lands of the west. The young man had a lightness in his step, with a sack of belongings draped over his chest. A pair of birds zipped over Elouan as he approached the fork that joined the eastern and western paths to the main road descending toward the city. He smiled after the singing chaffinches, a grin that spoke an affirmation of gratitude more than surprise. Their song came as a lilting reply to his appreciation. Then they bolted ahead of Rachel on her way to the city gates. Rachel jumped, startled by how close they came to grazing her head. Fortunately, the soothing notes of their song brought a pleasant smile to her lips. Elouan paused, captivated by the sight of civilization in harmony with the sea. It had taken a few days to get here since he rose from meditation, and he had found many wonderful stops along the way. He wondered if this would outdo them all. He could feel the excitement building, a chance to witness cultured life beyond his monastic school home. He was ready, his mind, education, skills, all set for whatever tests were ahead. So far, he had successfully vanquished the challenges already encountered, as evidenced by the cleanliness of his clothing and hygiene, his face washed of dirt, plus earlier that day he had shaved. Though his shoes and stockings showed a film of dust, Such was expected from so great a trek. The sudden bleating of the sheep captured him. He turned to see that he stood on the edge of a farming hamlet spread out upon the plateau overlooking the town below. A half-dozen small cottages with equally small fields dotted the landscape, a few separated by fences, with a larger manor house rising up in the far distance behind, as if standing sentinel, with a much larger pasture for planting. At the edge of the tiny village, artisans busied themselves with hammers and saws, constructing a new parish church, the facade and framework nearly finished. Elouan also noticed a mill with a water wheel slowly churning along a small creek at the eastern end of the community, near an orchard of fruit trees, just along the border to the eastern woods. The fields were farmed as a combination of wheat and grass, with livestock to help work the crops or as slaughter for food. It appeared the land was being readied for planting as a nearby farmer guided his plow behind a burly ox. Elouan marveled at how all life erupted in that single glance. There were ewes helping newborn lambs wobbling to stand for the first time. A pair of farmers coaxing and cheering as they assisted a cow to give birth, the calf falling out of its mother's backside, covered in caul.
A little early, but we'll still take her.
Elouan spied a peasant woman grabbing a racing chicken and hauling it into the hovel, no doubt for supper. Indeed, the fullness of existence was happening in that single moment.
It must only be a fragment of the wonders happening in the city.
He noticed the anticipation pushing him toward a sense of impatience, like opening a chest for the first time and diving in to uncover the treasures. He wanted to make fast to the urban center and its waterfront, but also knew he couldn't rush the journey, lest he miss something of its grandeur. Nevertheless, the eagerness of revelation put a jaunt in his step as he descended the sloping road leading to the town, seeing the cart of the young lady who came before him already far in the distance, leading him on. Cobblestone and earth stretched into a street through a dense packing of tenement buildings. Townsfolk crowded, wandering everywhere. Rachel, passing by on her horse, spied through open doors. Women prepping vegetables over a hearth, laughing at children playing around them. Dr. Massey, also known as a barber surgeon, piercing a patient's forearm and catching the blood in an urn.
This will help drain the infection.
Then passing the open Dutch door of the notary shop. The sign advertising his services was being rehung above the door, as one side had fallen loose a few days earlier from wind and rain. It ran down the list of his services: contracts, marriage, wills. Clearly, the sharply dressed lawyer was engaged in the last of these offerings. As Rachel could see, he was consoling a distraught woman with 3 weeping children.
I am so dreadfully sorry for your loss.
Rachel concurred. Her heart sank at the thought of the poor children growing up without their father. How much did they know him? Would his widow regale them with tales of his strength, compassion, and heroism? For sure, she also grieved for the wife. Hopefully, her husband left behind adequate finances for home and servants to ease the burden. Nonetheless, her mind kept returning to the kids. She knew intimately what they were about to face: the emptiness, the unanswered questions, wondering about the future that might have been, and the loss of so great a relationship. The thoughts consumed her for a few blocks, only to be broken by the realization she needed to steer clear of the women milling about in the middle of the road. They came one after the other, dumping chamber pots into the gutter that ran down the center of the street. One particularly elderly lady sneered as she tossed her slop into the trough.
Out to the bay with you, shite.
Rachel scrunched her nose to politely avoid the cesspool stench without offending the citizens. Fortunately, she turned down another street, leaving it behind. Here, she found more shops, including one of the more popular pubs in town. Already, its doors were open and patrons were crowding about. She recognized Matthias, a large brute of a man, stumbling out with a wooden goblet still in hand. He downed the beer with a single gulp. He then meandered to the middle of the road, dropped his drawers, and pissed in the gutter. Loose dogs suddenly scrambled across Rachel's path. She quickly steered the horse and avoided them. Then she wound around wild pigs munching on a heap of garbage. Throughout all this, her horse kept watch on the obstacle course of waste piles and scavenger animals, both wild and domestic. From the shadows, black rats reconnoitered for their next meal. After another few blocks, she landed at the livery. As she put her mare into one of the outside stalls, two small boys, Leo and Gladwin, rushed in, clashing wooden swords in play. Leo was the smaller at 5 years old and was clearly being outdone by his 7-year-old opponent.
Oh, some brave knights, I see.
Crusaders.
We shall vanquish the holy land of the infidels, we will.
I'm afraid not today. Now, instead of vanquish, why not you vanish out of the business of the streets? Go on now.
She kissed Gladwin on the forehead and then ushered them off.
Gladwin, Leo, do not fuss with the neighbors.
Lambkins.
See you tomorrow. All right.
Rachel went to the back of the cart. She paused, still caught in the throes of her encounter with Jehan. Annoyed, she ran a hand through her dirty hair, then grabbed a bucket filled with the chopped wood.
Boys, always talk to conquer and not to love.
Rachel carried the heavy bucket in both arms, winding around wild chickens and ducks as she navigated the dirty street. She passed her friends, Sarah and Clarice, as they dumped a cauldron of muck into the canal that ran down the edge of the road. The young girl sneered at the putrid smell and waved at the cloud of flies zipping about. There were several mounds poking above the waterline this day. After all, it was the communal cesspool for dropping waste. A nearby black rat sniffed the aroma on the breeze. Sarah spotted Rachel and chased after her.
Sarah, the madam! What are you...
A moment.
So what?
Rachel, he's the son of a nobleman. They don't usually hold interest outside of their own ranks.
You think he would honestly make me a noble woman? Jehan may be gifted with nobility, but today he showed himself to be as plebeian as the next ne'er-do-well.
Sarah stopped, dumbfounded, as Rachel kept walking away.
Aren't you daft?
Within a few moments, she turned down another street and entered a small cobbler shop. Her father, Humphrey, knelt over a bench, plucking an intricate pattern into the top of a leather shoe with a small metal poker. His arched back spoke to years of service, along with the thinning gray hair upon his head.
How fare ye, Papa?
Instead of acknowledging her, he dressed a pair of dusty sandals dangling on the wall before him.
At last, she returns with bounty that should have taken half a shadow to retrieve. Idle hands, my dear, idle hands.
Idle hands indeed.
Elouan anticipated a wondrous entrance as he approached the gate. He could see the tops of the tenements rising just beyond the wall, and the voices of the citizens rolling out like a strange yet alluring kind of music. He couldn't wait to dive in with all his senses once he passed onto the cobblestone streets. He didn't mind the sentries perched on the parapets controlling the gate. Every city needed its guard. An introduction to the modern world was only footsteps away, and he was brimming with joyous expectation. He stopped just as the ground transitioned to stone. Instead of being hit by the brilliance of civilization, it appeared rather chaotic to him. Most wore dingy clothes, their hair matted from lack of hygiene, wandering aimlessly or without direction. There were a few that seemed to have some purpose, but even they looked run down or otherwise caught in turmoil. The buildings also looked as though they needed repairs and were standing purely by grace rather than architectural design. The whole of the town's decay confused him. The energy that spurred him evaporated, and he stood transfixed in a futile effort to comprehend the disorder. A haggard, middle-aged woman, Maisalina, leaned out her second-story window with a chamber pot in hand.
Look out below.
Street people dispersed as she dumped the bucket's liquid poison, aiming for the piss gutter and sorely missing it. A young woman's fringe was painted with the slosh. Elouan remained speechless as the whole incident unfolded. As soon as it passed, a wandering pig nestled its snout into the gutter, searching the urine for a prize. Elouan then spotted a market where displays had been set up showing various fruits such as oranges, bananas, and other offerings. He watched an attendant pick up an apple from the base of a stack and destabilize the whole lot. A pair of apples careened off the stand and went rolling into the street, coming to an abrupt halt in a pile of horse manure. The laborer quickly grabbed them, but to Elouan's horror, he sparsely wiped them on his apron and then settled them back on the stand. Elouan found the coughing coming from a family towing a covered cart, entering the city alongside him. He noticed the father buckling from the hacking. His wife, concerned, placed a hand on her husband's forehead to check for fever. The elder man winced, then inserted a palm under his armpit, as if feeling something there. Elouan followed the cart, offering a silent prayer. A dog barreled across his path, forcing him to stop. Elouan panned around, soaking the sights in, but not in the way he had hoped. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply to ground himself. Even among all this, he knew the brightness of life was outpouring its glory. It just took more effort to spot it in the grime. However, with such effort, he could feel it, if only mildly. The vitality, though suppressed, was still present. With that, he smiled. When he opened his eyes, nothing had changed, save for his focus, but he knew that alone may tease out what was so hidden in the recesses of urban confusion. The notion inspired him to continue. He strolled down the street, a bit more at ease, knowing that right around the corner, something wonderful could happen. Giovanni, William, and Tivold, young rogues in their 20s, sat at a table and played backgammon near an open window looking down on the street.
Take that, you crooked-nosed knave.
Charles, I'd bet your best sheep.
You'd like his sheep, wouldn't you?
Tavold tossed his pieces at William, then glared at Giovanni.
Pound of you, too.
Tavold leapt to his feet and threw a punch at Giovanni. Giovanni caught the fist. All of a sudden, he spied Elouan out the window. Elouan looked clearly out of place. His clothes were slightly outdated, his cleanliness rather unusual, and, more importantly, carrying a knapsack of goods.
Looky here.
Elouan was delighted to have validation of his new sense of focus rewarded when he spotted a mother embracing her child after buying him candy. The love between them was most endearing. The emotional brilliance intensified when Elouan saw another set of parents suddenly take off running with their 4 children, stirring up a flock of birds that had settled in the street. Then he spotted a pair of lovers caressing each other as they rode a horse. He paused briefly, noting an intersection in the roadway. Which way to turn? He hoped he wouldn't have to wait several days in meditation to find out. Giovanni, William, and Tavold emerged from their tenement, seeing Elouan as he turned down the road heading toward the bay. They did their best to look inconspicuous as they crossed the street to follow. Elouan wasn't aware they were trailing, his mind too preoccupied with the sensations pouring through him. Unlike the first intersection in the forest, the direction of where to head was instant and distinct. It gnawed at his gut and commanded his attention, pulling him like an invisible rope. He kept his awareness firmly on the impression, the side effect being a sort of tunnel vision that didn't allow him to become aware of other things going on around him. Even Rachel's voice, clearly heard through the upper half of the open Dutch door, didn't register in his ears as he walked by.
What are you thinking, Papa?
I know he can be a passionate man, but you cannot marry for love, my sweet daughter.
So you would wish me to be miserable the whole of my life?
No, of course not. But it is when you marry for love that you would know true misery.
I am sorry, Papa.
They embraced.
You look more like her with each passing year. It'd be her birthday this week. On the day of Mass, you know.
My soul cries that I never chanced to know her.
Not here!
No, go back.
What is going on?
She opened a pair of shutters, revealing the pier a short distance away. A mob was gathered on the docks, where a Genoese Navy vessel was moored. The trading ship was colossal, with a holding compartment that could carry nearly a ton of goods. It boasted 2 large sails, the largest being the forward mast, towering nearly 90 feet high, with a smaller aft, nearly 70 feet, longer than the rounded hull of the ship itself. 2 large superstructures adorned the upper deck at the bow and rear, typically used for housing special passengers, notables, the helmsman, and the captain. Speaking of which, the captain had already stepped off the vessel, which resulted in the chaos of the crowd surrounding him. The Genoese skipper staggered as he forced his way forward. Several members of the gathering scowled as he drew nearer, offended by the rank smell of his attire. There would normally be a stench clinging to the clothes of those bound to the waterways, as they spent days or weeks exposed to the elements. However, with this seaman, the stink bore a much more sinister odor. It literally stung the nose and beckoned the thought of rotting flesh. Indeed, the crowd saw red and black splotches about the size of coins discoloring his chest through the slight opening of his tunic. He also kept a hand firmly pinned under his right armpit, as if protecting something there. Many kept a distance, though they could not find the courage to stop looking. Merovec and Baldwin didn't have the luxury. As port watchmen, it was their duty to protect the pier, and by extension, the city beyond. They too were uneasy about approaching the sailor, especially when they noticed the rest of the crew remained aboard the vessel and were oddly silent. No bustling about, no preparing to offload cargo. It was contrary to every trading vessel looking to dock. In fact, Merovec spotted a few clinging to the upper rails, suddenly collapsing to the deck. So much so, the closer the captain came, the higher he leveled his pike spear at him.
We want nothing of whatever you're trying to sell here. Return to your ship.
Help us.
Baldwin covered his mouth from the captain's stench. He noticed the seafarer's fingers were also black with gangrene.
Some have mutinied. I have them imprisoned below decks. We barely made it here.
Our doctors cannot help you. Now back up on your ship there.
The commotion grabbed the attention of passers-by on the port road. As Elouan arrived and took in the scene, he too focused on the ruckus, but with a distinct sense of knowing. Understanding the situation felt like a dark cloud rushing to embrace him, though he wouldn't allow it a victory in the overall depths of his spirit. He closed his eyes and moved his awareness deep into the center of his consciousness. After a moment, he found that special place within, where he linked into something much greater and more expansive than his own individuality.
Surely they can be spared.
Unfortunately, the subtle vibration that responded would not give him the reprieve he had asked. Rather, it felt like a colossal stone pulling him into the core of the earth. His muscles compressed as the sensation of being confined to a prison girdle became heavier and heavier. He opened his eyes, resigned to the reply. Several yards behind, Giovanni and the others spied from behind a cart, more interested in him than the commotion at the port.
Mercy!
Get back up there, we say!
We do not want your filth here.
The captain removed the hand from underneath his armpit. The tunic had been sufficiently torn to reveal an apple-sized welt bursting from his side. It was a mixture of red and black flesh protruding outward from his trunk.
Get up there. Go.
Pray. Pray for us.
Once out in the bay, you may discard your dead. But be out of here.
Drop our nib.
The helmsman stooped over the wheel, having expired upon it while the captain was off the ship, his face crooked on the spokes and splotched with a hideous rash, in addition to the dried blood upon his lips. Another sailor clung to the railing and gasped in a cough that echoed of a death rattle, with a huge mound of rotted flesh bulging from his neck, larger than the captain's own bubo under the armpit. Everywhere, it seemed, not a single crewman was left untouched. Several had discarded their clothes in the furnace of their fevers, lying naked upon the deck, yet also shivering in delirium. Others had cast off their pants to reveal a horrid lump on their inner thigh near the groin. For some, this lump was the size of a walnut, the others a large ball. But for everyone, a discolored knob that bespoke incredible suffering. Oftentimes, the skin at the base of such carbuncle was painfully red, creating a crimson ring around the mound. The exhausted sailors hesitated as they considered their abandonment by men and God. The intolerable agony of it all, the headaches, the fever, the throbbing of their bones so harsh, the blood vomited from their lungs so fiery. Were they forever to be without sanctuary? Were they to remain eternal prisoners on this ship of doom? Some couldn't hold out any longer. In fact, they suspected to receive no help even before the captain landed, so positioned themselves at the railings and waited for the confirmation. Now made, they threw themselves overboard. Depending on where they stood, they met their final breaths by the joy of drowning or the harsh impact of the pier. A few of them were dead as soon as they hit the deck, while the others welcomed the bludgeoning. More port watchmen raced in, aiming bows to strike any sailor who might swim ashore. Such fears quickly vanished when they saw the mutineers floating dead on the incoming waves. A stunning and pitiful sight. The captain shoved the helmsman from the wheel. He grabbed the spokes of the tiller and hurried to steer while nodding toward a few crewmen struggling to handle the mast. The duo heaved the massive sail to position it for evacuation. One of them suddenly plummeted to the floor. The sickness appeared to jump back on the captain, as he also collapsed to his knees. He swayed as the world circled torturously around him, then tumbled onto his back.
No. Heavenly Father, have mercy.
Merovec and Baldwin gazed with pity as the vessel sailed out into deeper waters. Disgusted, Merovec wiped the skipper's splatter from his boots.
Poor bastards.
God cast his judgment, I wager.
Smoke suddenly billowed from the vessel's portholes. Not only were the mariners discarding corpses and throwing themselves into the sea, they were also burning the ship. Though the people on board ship were ready to perish, the rodent stowaways in the cargo hold were not. The frantic colonies of rats scurried to find salvation amidst the billowing smoke and rush of seawater pouring in. Many squeezed through disintegrating planks, escaping to the safety of the open water, while others kept to crates or other debris that floated among the vessel's charred, flaming innards. No matter how they escaped, the rats either swam or waded to reach shore by way of the floating remains. In any case, they would survive, and so would the deadly fugitives they carried on their backs. Next time.
You here on business?
Finding my father. He may not be here, but I am aware of this path that will lead me to him.
What manner of strangeness is he?
Two people must work together to raise the heavy stones of a building such as this. Yet you do not ask the earth for its assistance in the making of your own survival.
I know my behavior was unwanted.
Please, I hear that Sarah is not feeling well.
I have done nothing wrong.
Do you repent or admit your guilt of sin?
Forgive.
You impudent!
She wants not that you pay for the life she gave you.